Welcome to the Itinerant Preacher Podcast, the space where you can come to fill up your pack with spiritual food and motivation as you travel down this road of life. In today's episode, we're going to look at a group of people that was condemned by Jesus and draw some modern day parallels to see if we warrant the same condemnation today. If I asked you who would be a group of people that Jesus condemned the most, who would you say? Most people that have read through the Bible more than once would instantly recognize that group as the Pharisees. Jesus many times even included another group in there called the scribes, and he roundly condemns them with a series of criticisms in Matthew chapter 23. Who were these people, and why were they constantly so scathingly criticized in the Gospels by Jesus? That is going to be the focus of our topic today. The Pharisees were no more or no less than one of four popular religious sects of Jews during Jesus' day. Just as today you have different denominations of Jews that follow different beliefs and creeds, you had the same in Jesus' day. Today you have Orthodox Jews who believe in adhering strictly to traditional Jewish law that you would read about in the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. And also they pay attention to their oral traditions. You have conservative Judaism, which seeks to preserve Jewish tradition, but allows some adaptation for modern circumstances. You have Reform Judaism, which is much more liberal and gives individuals the right to interpret Jewish beliefs and practices as they see fit. And you have several others that range in varying degrees along the spectrum of conservative versus liberal thoughts on Judaism. Some are more religious, some are more political, some are more social. Well, the exact same thing was true in Jesus' day. There were 4 main groups of Jews that were recognized by historians of the time. You had the Zealots, who were a Jewish revolutionary group characterized by their fierce opposition to Roman rule. These were a Jewish nationalist and basically what we would call today a terrorist organization. They would attack Roman soldiers via guerrilla warfare and even sympathizers within their own Jewish population. During the Jewish and Roman War of the Temple, which occurred from about AD 66 to 73, and that's where the Temple was destroyed in AD 70, they were the ones who were defending Jerusalem and the Temple. The most notable member of that group was Simon the Zealot, who was one of the 12 apostles. You also had another religious group of Jews known as the Essenes. This is a group of monastic Jews that popped up a couple of hundred years before Jesus was born. They saw the corruption and the materialism of the high-ranking Jews, which they renounced, so they went to the other end of the spectrum and started living a communal life of monks. There's no references of them specifically by name in the Bible, but some think that John the Baptist might have been an Essene based on his ascetic lifestyle. Their claim to fame is preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls in their caves, which were found in the 1950s, which provided a wealth of information for modern-day scholars and translators. A third Jewish sect of the day were the Sadducees. These were the aristocrats and the nobility of the Jews. They rejected the oral traditions, and they adhered strictly to the written law of the Torah. Their most notable difference was the fact that they rejected any thoughts about the afterlife. They believed that once you were dead in this earth, it was all over. A good way to remember this is that because of that belief, they were sad. You see? They're mentioned several times in Scripture alongside the Pharisees, and they try to trip Jesus up several times in asking him about the resurrection and the afterlife. Most of what we know about this group is because of the Jewish historian Josephus, who prolifically wrote about the Sadducees in his Antiquities history. And then finally, you have this group known as the Pharisees, which is the one group that we're going to focus on. This was the religious sect of the common people. Instead of the aristocracy of the Sadducees, the Pharisees were more lay people like farmers and merchants and tradesmen. They believed that there was an oral tradition that had been given to Moses that supplemented the written law of the Torah that Moses received on Mount Sinai. And although they are mostly condemned by Jesus throughout the Gospels, there are several Pharisees who are notably mentioned positively in the Gospels. You have Nicodemus, who is a Pharisee and a member of the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish ruling council. He's the one that comes to Jesus by night and discusses being born again. You have Gamaliel, who is a member of the Sanhedrin, who gives the famous advice in Acts 5 for them to be cautious in their treatment of the apostles, because if it was of human origin, it would fail. But if it was of God, how could they fight against it? Then, of course, you have the most famous Pharisee of all, the Apostle Paul, who wrote the majority of the New Testament. Even though you have some positive people that most assuredly were devout Pharisees and were not part of this big group that Jesus criticized, you do have them being soundly and roundly criticized by Jesus as a sect. He called them self-righteous hypocrites. He called them legalists who were more focused on the minutiae of the law rather than the more important matters. He condemned their lack of knowledge about the actual law against the importance that they placed on traditions. He slammed their insatiable need for public acknowledgement and praise and their focus on outward appearance. He accused them of leading the people astray and even called them a brood of vipers. Are any of these things true about religious leaders today? That's one question we're going to look at. But the even more important question is, are you like they were? We're going to do a deep dive into several of these accusations that Jesus made against the Pharisees. Then I hope you'll look at yourself to see if any of those apply to you. The first condemnation I want to look at is the one of self-righteousness. The famous example of this is the parable that Jesus told in Luke 18, starting in verse 9. It says, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, 'God, I thank you that I'm not like these other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get.' But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, 'God, have mercy on me, a sinner.' I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." The definition of self-righteousness is right there in verse 9. If you're confident in your righteousness and look down on everyone else. And it does take both of those things. We should definitely be confident in our righteousness and are actually told to do that in Hebrews 10, verse 19. But being overly confident or even falsely confident in your righteousness is a danger. In the Pharisees' mind, they were the picture of piety and righteousness. In their minds, they were the ones who would be seated close to God in heaven. But the harsh reality of the situation was that they were morally corrupt and egotistical, viewing themselves as superior to others, which is the antithesis of what Jesus was calling his followers to be. The second part of the verse is the real condemner. You look down on everybody else. Do you catch yourself comparing yourself to others in an attempt to elevate your own personal view of yourself? You'll find yourself saying things like, "Well, I know I've got my faults, but I'm not as bad as this person." Psychologically, at its core, self-righteousness stems from a deep-seated need for validation and a desire to appear morally superior. If you're a regular church attender, do this as a little experiment to see if your religious leaders and the message that they promote tends towards self-righteousness. Pay attention and note every single time that the preacher says something about another denomination or a group of people, compared to how many times he condemns practices or attitudes that are prevalent among the ones who are assembled. If you find the church leaders are constantly talking about other people or other groups, you have your answer about their self-righteous attitudes. They're seeking to validate themselves or their group and elevate their status in the eyes of themselves or of other churchgoers. If your first reaction was to defend them by saying, but the error needs to be addressed and preached against of other people, then you need to do a serious look at yourself and ask why you felt the need to defend that, as opposed to looking internally like the tax collector did in Jesus' parable. Are Christians called to be a different people? The Old King James rightfully translating it as a peculiar people? Absolutely. But that does not make Christians better than anyone else. Just like the Pharisees were condemned by Jesus for standing on the bloodlines of their ancestors and being morally superior to everybody else, he would also condemn modern-day Christians who stand on the moral superiority of being children of God based upon a membership. If you truly have a heart for others, you won't seek to condemn. You will seek to understand. And through understanding, you can seek to have a positive change on them. What is the difference in being righteous and self-righteous? The word self. Notice how many times the Pharisees used the word I in his prayer. It was all about him. How could a person be so self-unaware? How can people actually make themselves believe that they are morally superior? The answer is because they do all of the righteous acts that check all the boxes. They tithe. They give to the poor. They are in church every time the door is open. They lead great public prayers. Well, so did the Pharisees, and they were the most morally corrupt group that killed the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Some of the scariest words in the Bible are found in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus says, "Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you evildoers.'" It's so easy to delude yourself into believing that you're something that you're not. Checking all the boxes of righteousness is not what Jesus wants. He wants your heart and your humility. We're going to run out of time today, so we're definitely going to break this up into several parts and look at some more condemnations of these Pharisees. I know the first part today seemed more like a history lesson maybe, and that might not interest some of you. But the rest of the way, we were going to try to be more practical and personal and focus on applications that you can use for yourself. We're going to start next time with the condemnation of Jesus on their hypocrisy. Thank you for tuning in today. If you have not yet shared this YouTube channel with your friends, please do so that they too can enjoy another episode of The Itinerant Preacher.